All totalitarian systems, according to Desmet, must be preceded by a collective psychological phenomenon called mass formation, also known as mass hypnosis. We wonder, how did Nazi Germany happen? And why are so many comparisons to Nazi Germany happening right now? And notice, again, the agenda in the mainstream media to weaponize kindness. Don't you dare compare anything with COVID to do with anything with Hitler. As soon as you make that comparison in any way, you are now being unkind. You are now some really horrible sort of evil. How are we supposed to learn from history if we don't compare present situations to historical situations? How did a whole society believe that these people were an enemy? There was a hypnotic effect that happened. There were many factors, economic factors, media, propaganda factors, leadership factors that contributed to that hypnosis. Well, look at our world today. There's a lot of different factors. There's economic crisis, there's political crisis, there's societal division. There's a ton of different crises happening. We know that mainstream media is owned by the majority of the wealthiest corporations in the world. You don't have to reach very far to think that the narrative of the mainstream corporate media might be skewed or influenced a little bit or used for propaganda purposes. So she outlines here the 4 preconditions to this mass formation happening. Desmet maintains that these 4 preconditions were already present in our modern, alienating, stultifying societies prior to COVID. They are: a large percentage of the population feels socially isolated, and this was before COVID and lockdowns. Think about it, right? Lacks good social connections to other people. 2, a lack of meaning-making or sense-making prevails for many. People there feel their lives and jobs are meaningless. A lot of people feel like that. Trust me. I work with people making life changes from career to entrepreneurship. A lot of people feel that way. 3, a high degree of free-floating anxiety exists. Anxiety that cannot be connected to a specific object or circumstance. Now, that anxiety can be channeled towards a certain issue or a certain enemy. This free-floating anxiety is a consequence of the previous 2 conditions, social isolation and meaninglessness. And then 4, there's a high degree of frustration and latent aggression in the population arising from this free-floating anxiety, which in turn arises from the first 2 conditions. And he concludes here, under such conditions, a society is highly sensitive to narratives, particularly if these narratives are presented through the mainstream media. That's exactly what's happening. So here was the unifying narrative that needed to be created. And we're going to actually look at the marketing documents for different provincial agencies for dealing with this pandemic. And you'll see exactly the marketing strategies and the angles and hooks that they wanted to use and that they started using. It's in their marketing plan. So Desmet argues here that free-floating anxiety is the most painful psychological experience a human being can have, and people will do anything to end it, which requires finding an object to anchor it to, a so-called object of anxiety. So here we go. This is powerful. Through the process of mass formation, the population switches from a highly painful psychological state of social isolation to the opposite, to the state in which the population experiences a high level of solidarity. We are all in this together. Now we're all working on something together and we're part of the collective. We're doing something good for others and saving grandma. And that process leads to a kind of strong mental intoxication, which narrows the field of attention and focuses it until it contains only the aspects of reality on which the narrative focuses the attention. The corona narrative, for example. This is also why it's so hard to wake people up from this hypnosis, because you want to give them additional information, but their identity is now so tied to this narrative because it's what's giving them solidarity with other people. If this narrative crumbles, their community, their collective, the bonds that they have created with others will have to crumble and shatter as well. And that is incredibly frightening. Once you understand that, you can understand why the corona narrative can be utterly absurd and blatantly wrong. right? You walk into a restaurant with a mask, you sit down and sit for the next hour and a half with other strangers without it. Makes no logical sense, right? I mean, you know, it just goes on and on. It's absurd and it's wrong. And people will still continue to follow it and to go along with it in a state of hypnosis. And this is what's frightening here. In a state of hypnosis, you can take away everything from a population. You can take away their financial well-being, take away their physical integrity, their physical health. As long as the population remains in the grasp of the mass-forming narrative, they will psychologically not notice that there is collateral damage. So he continues that this unifying narrative not only offers people an object of anxiety as a pacifier, but it simultaneously solves the other problems that they were experiencing. People are no longer feel isolated. They're now bonded with a huge number of other people in an intoxicating crush of solidarity, united in a noble mission. That's what we talked about. So their lives now have great meaning rather than no meaning. And so their free-floating anxiety has now been anchored to something identifiable. Who is immune to mass hypnosis? Yeah, that'd be me right here, and that'd be a lot of us here who can see right through this BS, right? This brings us to what I consider the most interesting aspect of Desmond's analysis: who is consumed by mass formation and who is not. So according to Desmond, there's always three groups at the outset. Those who are fully hypnotized true believers account for about 30 to 35%. That's the number I was saying. Those who are going to go along mainly out of convenience, self-preservation, or to avoid the scorn and wrath of the true believers. They might partially believe the narrative, but they aren't fully committed. That's the majority of Canadians here. Now, they're saying that's about 30 to 35%. And then those who reject the narrative, that's another 30%. And I think it was smaller in Canada. But you can see that those people in the middle, that 30 to 40% in the middle, those can be swayed into both directions. They will move with the popular crowd. And that's why I'm really looking forward to when the left starts to wake up, those left center people start to realize what's really going on. Once the digital surveillance kicks in, once the global reset really gets into gear economically and through surveillance and security, more of those people will start to wake up. And this 30% of the population is going to grow into 50 and eventually a majority. And she talks about how she was fully supportive of all the lockdowns and all the measures. By 2021, the COVID zero strategy no longer looked logical. Fortunately for her, she's a logical thinker, right? So it started to not make sense. She started to be able to see the damage. What helped in her awakening was information. You know, she wasn't completely in the hypnosis, and so with the right information, she was able to see, wow, there's a lot of other things going on here that I wasn't aware of. And that's really what good, caring, reasonable Canadians need to do, is they need to just look at the information. So then she asks the question, Greens and the left forever hypnotized? My assessment is that the first group in Desmond's breakdown of mass formation, the fully hypnotized, are not reachable and cannot be recovered. I agree with her. It's also my assessment that the majority of Greens and the left have unfortunately landed in that first group and are now completely intoxicated with what Desmond calls the absurd corona narrative. They seem fully embedded in the mass formation, unable to awaken, unable to widen their focus to see the collateral damage caused by the illogical narrative and their fervent allegiance to it. And then she shares her personal experience with Elizabeth May, who was at that time the former leader of the Canadian Greens, where she reflexively recoiled from her at an outdoor political event in August upon discovering my vaccination status. It was hilarious, right? So I look forward to Kim's future essay. I haven't checked if she's actually written it yet. Maybe she has. I'll link to it if she has. Where she's talking about, I'll explore what we can do, what creative strategies and imaginative acts are needed to collectively break free from this nightmare of mass hypnosis. All right, so if you liked this video, thumbs up, subscribe, like it, share it, comment, do all that stuff. Please get it out there. Please comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your insights, your revelations, especially if you're more aligned with the left, the NDP, Green, Liberal. We'd love to hear your comments, your realizations, and what do we do? How do we move forward? That's going to be the conversation that we're going to take from here.